The day started like any other at the bustling airport. A young, well-dressed black man, carrying only a sleek black suitcase, stepped confidently towards the gate. His flight was supposed to be routine, another business trip, another day in the life of a successful executive. But as he approached the gate, the agent at the counter, a middle-aged white woman with a stern expression, glanced at his ticket, then up at him. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and a cool voice broke the air. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not allowed to board this flight." He raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. The agent's tone was dismissive, as though his presence here was a mistake. He calmly pulled out his ticket, showing her once more, but she refused to even look at it. "This is for first-class passengers only. You clearly don't belong here," she said with a smirk. His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now back to our story. As he hung up the phone, the agent turned to her supervisor, a young man with a sharp suit and a look of impatience. He whispered something to her, clearly unbothered. But the young man's expression shifted when he looked back at the black man, his casual demeanor evaporating. He didn't realize it yet, but this man wasn't just another traveler. This man wasn't some random businessman. This man was someone who owned not only the flight, but the very airline that was about to be grounded, if the agent didn't step aside. The tension in the air was palpable. The black man stepped back slightly, giving them a moment to react, but his eyes were firm and his voice was steady. "You've just made a mistake. I own this airline, and I'll make sure you and your team never work again." The agent's face blanched as she realized what he meant, but it was too late. With that, the entire crew's future hung in the balance. This wasn't just a flight, and this wasn't just about a ticket. It was about power, respect, and the truth being revealed in real time. The day started like any other at the bustling airport. A young, well-dressed black man, carrying only a sleek black suitcase, stepped confidently towards the gate. His flight was supposed to be routine, another business trip, another day in the life of a successful executive. But as he approached the gate, the agent at the counter, a middle-aged white woman with a stern expression, glanced at his ticket, then up at him. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and a cool voice broke the air. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not allowed to board this flight." He raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. The agent's tone was dismissive, as though his presence here was a mistake. He calmly pulled out his ticket, showing her once more, but she refused to even look at it. "This is for first-class passengers only. You clearly don't belong here," she said with a smirk. His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now back to our story. As he hung up the phone, the agent turned to her supervisor, a young man with a sharp suit and a look of impatience. He whispered something to her, clearly unbothered. But the young man's expression shifted when he looked back at the black man, his casual demeanor evaporating. He didn't realize it yet, but this man wasn't just another traveler. This man wasn't some random businessman. This man was someone who owned not only the flight, but the very airline that was about to be grounded, if the agent didn't step aside. The tension in the air was palpable. The black man stepped back slightly, giving them a moment to react, but his eyes were firm, and his voice was steady. "You've just made a mistake. I own this airline, and I'll make sure you and your team never work again." The agent's face blanched as she realized what he meant, but it was too late. With that, the entire crew's future hung in the balance. This wasn't just a flight, and this wasn't just about a ticket. It was about power, respect, and the truth being revealed in real time. As the tension in the gate area grew, the black man stood still, his phone still in hand. The agent, now visibly shaken, walked away to speak with her supervisor. The young man in the sharp suit gave the agent a dismissive glance and whispered something under his breath. The agent's face flushed with embarrassment, but she still attempted to hold her ground, trying to dismiss the situation as if it were just another small issue. However, it was clear that things were about to change. Meanwhile, the black man didn't move, standing as if anchored to the ground, his expression calm, yet resolute. His call had been made, and now it was time for the fallout. A few moments later, the supervisor walked over, a man in his 30s, exuding an air of arrogance that only came with privilege. He had no idea who this man was. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion, but you'll need to move along. There's a first-class line for a reason," the supervisor said, trying to sound authoritative. The black man met his gaze, a slow, deliberate smile forming on his lips. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about me getting on this plane. This is about how people like me are treated, and you're going to find out exactly what that feels like." The supervisor blinked, momentarily thrown off by the words. He had expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but what he got was a calm assurance that made him uneasy. The gate agent, still trying to regain her composure, stood by, glancing nervously at the supervisor. The black man stepped forward slightly, his presence commanding, not with loud words, but with an undeniable energy. "I own this airline," he said slowly, each word dripping with authority. "And I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to show you just how wrong you are." The supervisor, now realizing the gravity of the situation, stammered, unsure of what to say. He looked around, hoping for some support from his colleagues or passengers, but the room was eerily silent. The passengers, who had once been casually murmuring, now stood still, watching the scene unfold, some with their phones discreetly raised. The black man didn't wait for a response. He continued, "You want to embarrass me in front of everyone here, but let me make this clear. The only person who's going to be embarrassed by the end of this is you." A few of the passengers, sensing the shift in power, started whispering among themselves, some nodding in agreement. The agent, now visibly sweating, motioned to the plane, trying to redirect the situation, but her efforts were futile. The man's words had already planted a seed of doubt in the air. The supervisor finally realized he had no control over this situation. The black man was not some ordinary passenger. He was a man with the power to dismantle everything in that room. Just as the supervisor opened his mouth to speak, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen for a moment, then calmly looked up and said, "It's already done. The flight's been grounded. You can call your superiors, but there's no going back now." The shock on the supervisor's face was palpable, and the gate agent looked as though she might faint. The passengers were now fully aware of what was happening, and the once tense but quiet atmosphere had shifted to one of stunned disbelief. "What do you mean, grounded?" the supervisor asked, his voice trembling slightly. The black man leaned in, his voice low but filled with undeniable authority. "I just made one phone call. You'll be lucky if this airline is still in the air today. And it's not about the flight. It's about what just happened here." The supervisor opened his mouth to argue but was cut off by the sound of an announcement blaring over the intercom. It was a message from the airline's corporate headquarters, and the tone was cold and final. "Attention, passengers. Due to a company-wide directive, this flight has been grounded indefinitely. Please remain in the gate area for further instructions." A collective gasp echoed through the terminal, and the black man turned to face the passengers. His face remained calm, but his words rang out like a verdict. "This is how you treat people who are different, but not anymore. The days of discrimination and humiliation are over. I will make sure of that." With those final words, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a sea of stunned faces, unsure of what had just transpired but knowing that everything had changed in those few minutes. The gate agent and her supervisor were left speechless, their once confident authority shattered. This wasn't just about a plane or a ticket. This was a statement, a reckoning that had only just begun. The announcement over the intercom echoed through the terminal, leaving a silence that was almost palpable. Passengers exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to do next. The black man, who had now revealed his power, walked calmly toward the exit, his presence still commanding the room even as he left. The gate agent and her supervisor remained frozen in place, their faces pale with realization. For a moment, the airport seemed to hold its breath, as if time had stopped, and everyone was caught in the weight of the events that had just unfolded. As he reached the door, the black man turned his head slightly, addressing the supervisor one last time. "I hope you take this as a lesson," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fury that still hung in the air. "You can't treat people like this anymore. Not on my watch." The supervisor, still shaken, nodded, but it was clear that his pride had already been crushed. He had no words left. The black man walked out, leaving the two of them standing in the middle of a scene that had now become a spectacle. He stepped into the parking lot, where his sleek black car was waiting for him, and without a second thought, he got in. As the car pulled away, the phone in his pocket buzzed again. It was his assistant, Carla. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of concern, "we've been getting reports of the situation at the airport. I just want to confirm. Did you make sure that everything was handled?" "It's already done," he replied with authority, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Everything they tried to do, all the humiliation and bias, it's over. They won't be able to get away with it anymore." Carla paused for a moment before responding. "Understood, sir. We're already working on the next steps. The team is on it." The black man nodded, a sense of satisfaction settling in. "Good. Keep me updated. It's time we make some real changes." As he drove, he thought back to his own experiences, times when he had been dismissed, ignored, or even ridiculed because of his race. He remembered the first time he was told he didn't look the part to sit in a first-class seat, the time when a loan officer called him high risk despite providing more collateral than necessary, and the countless other moments where his worth had been questioned simply because of how he looked. But now, as the owner of the very airline that had tried to deny him a seat, he had the power to change things, not just for himself, but for everyone else who had faced discrimination. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment he knew had the potential to shift the entire system. It wasn't just about a single incident at the airport. It was about setting a precedent, making sure that this kind of treatment would never happen again. He made another call, this time to the head of the airline's corporate office. "I need you to gather every piece of data on the crew members involved in today's incident," he said firmly. "I want their records. I want the complaints. I want everything. And don't leave anything out." There was a slight pause on the other end before the corporate head replied. "Understood, sir. We'll get everything to you immediately." "Good," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. "This is just the beginning. I'm not going to let them get away with this. We will start the reform now." He hung up, his mind already focused on the next steps. This wasn't just about making a statement. It was about making real, tangible changes. As the car drove through the city, he felt a sense of calm determination settle over him. He wasn't just going to change an airport or a flight. He was going to change the way people treated others who didn't fit their narrow definition of who belonged. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it was Carlo again, her voice now urgent. "Sir, we've located an additional complaint. It's from a flight 2 months ago, and it involves the same crew. There's more to this than we thought." His grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Send it to me. I want everything on my desk by the morning. And let the board know we're moving forward with immediate action. No more waiting." "Absolutely," Carla replied. "We'll make sure it's done." The black man's thoughts raced, his determination growing. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. It was about making sure the people who had wronged him and countless others would be held responsible. And it wasn't going to stop with this one incident. As he drove, he made one final resolution. He would not stop until the entire system was restructured, until everyone who had been subjected to this kind of bias was heard, respected, and treated with dignity. This was his mission now, and nothing would stand in his way. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the city, the black man sat at his desk, reviewing the documents that Carla had sent over. The files on the crew members involved in the incident were thick with records, complaints, and reports, each one more damning than the last. As he sifted through the details, it became clear that this was not an isolated event. The crew's behavior was part of a larger pattern of discriminatory actions, and it was worse than he had initially thought. He leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications of what he was seeing. He had always known that racism existed in the industry, but seeing the evidence laid out in front of him was a sobering reminder of how deep the problem ran. This wasn't just about one bad experience. This was systemic. He took a deep breath and dialed his corporate headquarters again. I need you to prepare an all-hands meeting for the board, he said, his voice calm but firm. It's time we address this problem head-on. No more delays. Carla's voice came through the phone clearly. We'll have it set up, sir. You'll have the full board's attention. Good, he replied. Make sure we have the full records for the meeting. I want everyone involved. Every complaint, every issue, every detail. We're going to show them just how deeply this goes. As he hung up, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He had known that his position gave him the power to enact change, but now it felt like the weight of that responsibility was heavier than ever. He had a clear path ahead, but it was going to take more than just firing a few people. It was going to take a full overhaul of the company's culture. A few hours later, he stood at the head of a large conference table, surrounded by the board members of his airline. The room was tense, the weight of the situation hanging in the air like an invisible cloud. He could feel their eyes on him, some of them nervous, others skeptical, but all of them waiting for him to speak. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before addressing the room. I called this meeting today to talk about a situation that should never have happened, he began, his voice steady and unwavering. I've seen the reports, and I've seen the video. What happened at the airport yesterday is not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger, systemic issue that has plagued this company for far too long, and I won't stand for it any longer. The room was silent, the board members exchanging glances, but no one spoke. It's clear that there's been a culture of discrimination and bias at this company, and it's time for it to end, he continued. We have employees who are not only acting on their own prejudice, but also reinforcing the system that enables it. This is not just about a single employee's behavior. This is about a broken system, and we need to fix it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He could see the discomfort on some of their faces, but he wasn't going to back down. Effective immediately, we are going to implement sweeping changes. We will be conducting a full audit of every employee's performance, every complaint that has been buried, and every instance of bias that has been ignored. There will be zero tolerance for discrimination at every level of this company. He paused again, his gaze sweeping over the room. The first step will be firing anyone involved in discriminatory behavior, starting with the crew members from yesterday's flight. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. He wasn't finished. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice firm. I will not rest until this company is held accountable for every wrong that has been done, and I will make sure that every employee here understands that discrimination will never be tolerated again. We will rebuild this company's culture, starting from the top down. The room remained silent, but the tension had shifted. Now, it wasn't just about a single incident. It was about a company-wide shift that would ripple through the entire organization. As the meeting ended and the board members began to file out of the room, the black man stayed seated, his thoughts already moving toward the next steps. There was a lot of work to be done, but he was ready for it. This was his moment, and he was determined to see it through. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been treated unfairly, ignored, or dismissed because of their race. And this time, things were going to be different. The days following the board meeting were filled with action. The black CEO, now fully aware of the magnitude of the task ahead, had initiated the audit as promised. His office, once a place of routine business, had turned into a command center where change was being forged. The corporate team had already started gathering data on employee complaints, performance reviews, and every instance of racial bias that had been documented, or more often, ignored. The files were stacked high on his desk, each one telling a story of systemic inequality and discrimination that had been allowed to fester for years. He spent hours poring over the reports, each one a stark reminder of how deeply entrenched the bias was within the company's culture. He had expected it, but seeing it laid bare in front of him was still a punch to the gut. He knew, however, that this was just the beginning. The work had to be done, and it had to be done right. Carla, his assistant, stood by his side, keeping him updated on the progress. The team has compiled all the complaints from the last year, she said, holding a thick binder in her hands. And we flagged every employee involved in incidents of discrimination. The CEO nodded, his expression focused as he flipped through the files. Good, he said, his voice low but firm. We need to move quickly. I want every one of them interviewed, and I want to know what action has been taken. Carla hesitated for a moment, then added, There's something. Well, sir, we've discovered a pattern. Several complaints have been suppressed or classified as unresolved when they clearly were not. The CEO's eyes narrowed as he looked up from the papers. I want names, Carla, he said, his tone sharp. I want to know who buried these complaints and why. This is bigger than we thought. Over the next few weeks, the company's leadership team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. What they found was worse than anyone had anticipated. Not only had employees been mistreated, but the company's own internal systems had actively enabled this behavior by covering it up or downplaying its severity. The Black CEO's resolve only grew stronger as the evidence mounted. He knew that this wasn't just about punishing a few individuals. This was about dismantling a culture that had allowed this discrimination to thrive for so long. As he continued to meet with the board and corporate staff, his actions began to speak louder than his words. He made it clear that there would be no more tolerance for biased behavior in any form. We are implementing new training programs for every level of staff, starting with upper management, he told the board during one of their meetings. Every manager, supervisor, and executive will go through anti-bias and diversity training, and it will be mandatory. We will hold everyone accountable, starting from the top down. The board members, who had once been skeptical, now listened intently. The CEO's determination was undeniable, and it was clear that he was ready to burn down the old ways and build something better. We will be restructuring our entire complaint process, he continued, so that no employee ever has to feel like they don't have a voice, no matter what level they're at. We will create a direct, anonymous feedback system for employees to report any incidents without fear of retaliation. The room was silent as the CEO's words sank in. For the first time, they understood the depth of the change he was aiming for. This wasn't just about fixing a few bad apples. It was about redefining the entire company's approach to diversity and inclusion. As the weeks passed, the Black CEO's changes began to take effect. The company's culture was shifting, albeit slowly. He knew it wasn't going to happen overnight, but every action they took brought them one step closer to the vision he had in mind. A company where every employee, regardless of their race or background, would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. One morning, as he walked into his office, Carla handed him a report that made him stop in his tracks. Sir, you need to see this, she said, her voice filled with urgency. He took the report and quickly skimmed through it. It was an internal memo from one of the airline's regional offices, highlighting a complaint from a Black employee who had been harassed by a supervisor for months. The employee had finally spoken out, but the company had failed to act. The CEO clenched his fists, feeling the familiar surge of anger. This is exactly why we're doing this, he muttered to himself. He turned to Carla. We need to escalate this immediately. No more delays. This stops now. Carla nodded and immediately made the necessary calls to ensure the investigation would be thorough and swift. As the CEO sat back in his chair, he knew that the road ahead would be long, but it was one he was prepared to walk. For every person who had suffered at the hands of the company's old ways, this fight was worth it. The changes were happening, and they would continue until every employee could feel proud to work for the company. He wasn't just leading a business. He was leading a movement, and he would see it through to the end. The pressure had been building for weeks. The Black CEO knew that the changes he had started were only the beginning of a long journey. The company was on the verge of something monumental, but it wasn't enough just to implement policies or fire a few people. The culture needed to change from the inside out. That meant everyone had to be held accountable, and there was no room for half measures. He stood at the head of the conference table once again, looking out at the faces of the senior leadership team. The room was quieter than usual, the weight of the past few weeks pressing on everyone in attendance. The CEO had called this meeting to check on their progress, and he wasn't in the mood for excuses. We've made some strides, he began, his voice calm but serious. But there's still a lot of work to do. I want to know what steps each of you have taken to ensure this company lives up to the values we've outlined. One by one, the executives reported on the changes they had implemented. Some spoke about revised policies, others about new training programs. But as he listened, the CEO realized that they were still skirting the issue. They were still talking about small changes, incremental progress. It wasn't enough. I'm not hearing enough, he said, cutting through the silence. I need to see action. Not just words, not just plans, but real, visible change. His eyes scanned the room, his gaze steady and unwavering. This company has been built on the backs of people who have been silenced, ignored, and mistreated for far too long. That stops now. You all need to be more than managers of change. You need to be leaders of it. The room shifted as his words sank in. The tone had changed. There was no more room for complacency, no more room for waiting. The CEO had made it clear, this was not just a corporate initiative. This was a movement. He didn't wait for anyone to respond. Instead, he pulled out a report from his briefcase, one that Carla had handed him earlier that morning. I've seen a pattern, he continued, looking directly at the head of human resources. This is not just about a few bad apples. This is a deeply rooted issue, and it's been allowed to fester for too long. If we are to truly make this company a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, we have to tackle it head-on, not just on the surface. The HR director shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but the CEO didn't give him a chance to speak. We're not going to stop until we root out every instance of bias, discrimination, and mistreatment. That means full transparency, full accountability, and full support for those who speak up. It's time to stop pretending like we can just fix this with policies and diversity training. We need a culture shift, and that's going to take real action. He paused for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. The room was tense now, the reality of the situation settling over them. I will not tolerate any more half-hearted attempts at change, the CEO said, his voice strong and unwavering. I've given you all the tools, but now it's up to you to make this happen. I want to see results. If anyone here is not fully committed to this, now is the time to speak up. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. The CEO's gaze swept across the room, meeting each person's eyes one by one. It was clear, this was a moment of reckoning, not just for the company, but for the people sitting in that room. They all knew what was at stake. The CEO stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. We are not done here, he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. This company will change, but it will only change if each of you steps up and takes ownership of this process. We will not settle for anything less. As the team filed out of the room, the CEO sat back down at his desk, his mind racing with the next steps. The battle for the soul of the company had only just begun. He was ready for it, but it was clear that this was going to take time. He had the power to make the changes, but he also knew it would take every ounce of his strength, leadership, and resolve to see it through. The phone buzzed on his desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Carla. Sir, we've got a situation, she said, her voice urgent. A former employee is claiming that they were wrongfully terminated because of their race. They filed a lawsuit. The CEO's eyes narrowed as he leaned back in his chair. Send me the details, he replied, his mind already shifting gears. This is exactly why we have to get this right. We cannot afford to let the past define us any longer. He hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, thinking about the journey ahead. It was going to be hard, and it was going to be messy, but he wasn't going to stop until the company he led was a place where no one would ever feel like they didn't belong again. The lawsuit Carla mentioned was just the beginning. The CEO knew that the change he was pushing for was not going to come easily, and the challenges would only escalate from here. The situation with the former employee, however, was a critical turning point. As the legal team gathered the necessary information, he couldn't help but reflect on the deeper issues at play. This wasn't just about one isolated case. It was a symptom of the larger systemic problems he was trying to dismantle within the company. It wasn't about winning or losing a lawsuit. It was about proving to the world that things would be different from here on out. He had made a promise to himself, to his employees, and to everyone who had ever felt dismissed or marginalized in this company, that things were going to change. Sitting in his office late that afternoon, the Black CEO glanced over the latest report from the legal team, his eyes narrowing as he read through the details. The former employees' claims were serious, alleging that they had been let go due to racial discrimination, with no clear explanation provided for their termination. What made it worse was the fact that the person had been with the company for years, working tirelessly without receiving the recognition they deserved. This case had the potential to open a floodgate of similar complaints. It could also risk his credibility if the company wasn't able to address it quickly and transparently. He leaned back in his chair and picked up the phone, dialing Carla's number. Carla, get the legal team on a call with me in the next hour, he said, his tone decisive. "We need to plan our next steps and make sure we handle this correctly. I want the full details on how this employee was treated, and I want a statement ready for the press." Carla's voice came through immediately. "I'll make sure it's done, sir. I'll set up the call now." Hanging up the phone, the CEO's mind began to race through possible solutions. This wasn't a time to play defense. He needed to go on the offense, to make it clear that his company would be a place where no one would ever be treated unfairly again. He would take responsibility, not only for the situation at hand, but also for the broader culture that had allowed these issues to fester. The conference call started an hour later, with the legal team outlining the details of the former employee's case. The CEO listened closely, asking probing questions and demanding thorough answers. "We need to move fast," he said, his voice calm but intense. "Prepare a full investigation and make sure we offer a fair and transparent process. We can't allow any more incidents like this to slip under the radar. This company's future depends on our ability to right these wrongs, and I'm not backing down." As the call ended, the CEO took a deep breath, realizing just how much was at stake. His commitment to reforming the company was unwavering, but the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. There would be pushback, of course. There always was when real change was involved. But he was ready to face it head-on. Over the following weeks, the investigation into the former employee's claims moved swiftly. The company's internal review board had already begun interviewing other employees, and they uncovered several troubling patterns of behavior, similar to what the former employee had described. As more information came to light, it was clear that there was a long history of issues that had been swept under the rug. The CEO knew he had to act quickly and decisively. He met with the board once again, his resolve stronger than ever. "We are going to make a public statement," he said firmly, looking around the table. "And we are going to take full responsibility. This company needs to prove that it is committed to doing the right thing, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it may be." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. The CEO continued, "I will not sit idly by while our employees suffer in silence. This company is going to change, and it starts today." In the days that followed, the CEO led the charge in making sweeping changes to the company's policies, from the way complaints were handled to how diversity and inclusion training was implemented. He ensured that all levels of the company were held accountable, starting with upper management. There would be no more hiding behind the corporate veil of indifference. Every person in the company, from the top down, was going to be part of the change. As the CEO's efforts began to take shape, he started to receive messages from employees across the company, messages of gratitude, hope, and support. Many had felt for years that their voices had been silenced, but now, for the first time, they felt like they were being heard. The momentum was building, and the CEO knew that the company was on the verge of a transformation that could impact not only the lives of those who worked there, but the entire industry. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, the CEO felt a sense of pride for the first time in a long while. The work was far from over, but the changes he had set in motion were starting to gain traction. He knew that no matter the obstacles ahead, he would continue to fight for what was right, for every employee, for every person who had ever been treated unfairly. He stood up from his desk, looking out the window at the city skyline. This was just the beginning. Weeks passed, and the Black CEO's vision for change began to take root across the company. The investigations into racial discrimination and bias had unearthed more than just individual instances of misconduct. They had exposed a pervasive culture of inequality that had been woven into the fabric of the organization for decades. But with each revelation came a new commitment to fix it, a promise that he intended to keep. The company's new diversity initiatives were beginning to gain traction, but the road was long, and resistance still lingered. The employees who had once been afraid to speak up were now coming forward in droves, telling stories of bias and mistreatment that had never seen the light of day. The CEO had always known that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but now, as the feedback began to pour in, he felt a sense of urgency like never before. He knew he had to act quickly before the moment passed, before the momentum they had worked so hard to build started to fade. As he sat in his office late one night, reviewing the latest round of reports from the HR department, Carla knocked on the door and stepped in. "Sir, we've received a new complaint," she said, her voice calm, but with an edge of concern. It's from a senior manager who's been with the company for over 15 years. They're claiming that the changes you're implementing are too radical and that it's disrupting the company culture. They're asking for a meeting to discuss it. The CEO paused, reading through the report before setting it down on his desk. Disrupting the culture, he repeated softly, his gaze fixed on the document. It's exactly what needs to happen. A culture that has allowed this kind of treatment to persist for so long is one that needs to be shaken to its core. If they can't see that, then maybe it's time for them to rethink their place here. Carla nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. I'll arrange the meeting, but it's clear that there's still some resistance. It might be time to take a more direct approach. The CEO sat back in his chair, letting her words sink in. Resistance was inevitable. He had expected it, but it still stung to see it coming from within the ranks of the company. Set the meeting up, he said after a moment. I'll deal with it personally. We're not going to let fear or old habits hold us back. As Carla left to arrange the meeting, the CEO leaned back, his thoughts racing. He had come so far, but he knew that the most difficult battles were still ahead. The changes he was making weren't just about policy. They were about creating a company that could truly stand for equality, where people of all backgrounds could thrive. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. He wasn't just leading a company. He was leading a movement, and movements were never without their challenges. The next morning, the senior manager arrived at his office, visibly tense but determined. The CEO greeted them with a firm handshake before inviting them to sit down. I understand you have concerns, he said calmly, his tone not confrontational but firm. I want to hear them. But before you do, let me be clear. The changes we're making are not optional. They are not a matter of debate. This is a turning point for this company, and it's non-negotiable. The senior manager shifted uncomfortably in their seat, but nodded. I get that, they said. But these changes, they're disruptive. The company has been successful for years. These policies you're pushing, the diversity programs, they're too much, too fast. People are feeling alienated, and I'm worried we're going to lose key employees. The CEO leaned forward, his gaze intense. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice unwavering. Do you think that the success of this company has been built on the backs of everyone, or just a select few? Do you think we've truly been successful if some of our employees have been silenced, overlooked, or mistreated? Because if that's the kind of success you want to go back to, then I can't be a part of it. And frankly, I don't think any of us should be. The senior manager's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time in the conversation, they seemed to reconsider their position. But these changes, they began, then stopped, clearly struggling with the weight of the question. These changes are about more than just making a few adjustments, the CEO continued, his voice steady. They're about creating a future where no one has to fight for respect, where no one is forced to hide who they are just to survive. The old ways of doing business are over. If you can't get on board with that, then maybe it's time for you to think about whether this is the right place for you. The silence in the room was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of realization. The senior manager sat back, their expression unreadable for a moment before they sighed deeply. I didn't see it like that, they said quietly. Maybe I was too focused on the immediate fallout and not enough on the long-term impact. The CEO nodded. That's understandable. Change is hard, but it's necessary. And when we look back, we'll see that this was the right thing to do. For all of us. The senior manager sat in silence for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll support it. I see now that it's the only way forward. The CEO smiled, the tension in the room easing. Thank you. We need everyone's support to make this work. Together, we're going to build something better. As the senior manager left the office, the CEO sat back, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He knew that there would be more difficult conversations ahead, but this one felt like a victory. The company was slowly but surely being transformed, and he was more determined than ever to see it through to the end. As the weeks went by, the changes within the company started to take shape, but the CEO knew the hard work had only just begun. He had been relentless in his pursuit of justice for the employees who had been mistreated, but now, he was looking ahead to how the company would function in the future. His focus was clear. He wanted a company that was not just diverse in name, but diverse in action, where everyone, no matter their background, could thrive equally. The momentum that had been built was undeniable, but there was still more to do. He spent his days overseeing the implementation of new programs, ensuring that every department was on board with the changes, and checking in with the staff to see how the new initiatives were being received. The energy in the company had shifted. It was palpable. Employees who had once kept their heads down were now speaking up, offering suggestions, sharing ideas, and helping each other succeed. It was the culture he had always envisioned, but it hadn't been easy to get here. One morning, as he walked through the office, he passed by a group of employees gathered around the coffee machine. They paused, looked up, and smiled, nodding their heads in acknowledgement. It was a small moment, but one that meant everything. For the first time in a long while, he felt that the work was starting to pay off. But there was still a sense of urgency. The lawsuit from the former employee had not gone away. In fact, it had turned into a media frenzy. The story had spread far beyond the walls of the company, and now, reporters were calling every day, asking for statements and comments. The CEO knew that the way they handled this would set the tone for how they were perceived going forward. He was prepared for the questions, and he had made it clear to the public that the company was fully committed to accountability and change. "I'm not here to play defense," he said in one interview. "We are not trying to cover up our past mistakes. We are facing them head-on, and we are doing everything in our power to make sure that something like this never happens again." The words were well received, but the CEO knew that words were only part of the equation. Action had to follow. As the company continued to evolve, there were still many difficult moments ahead. He met with more employees, listened to their stories, and worked with his leadership team to ensure that every corner of the company was included in the transformation. It wasn't enough just to change the policy. He wanted to change the hearts and minds of the people who worked there. In one of his most impactful meetings, he sat down with a group of lower-level employees who had been with the company for years. Their stories were heart-wrenching, tales of subtle, ongoing discrimination, of being passed over for promotions, of being made to feel less than because of their race. The CEO listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of their words. He made promises to them that day, promises to take action and hold their supervisors accountable. But he also made another promise, that he would make sure they had the tools and opportunities to succeed. "I hear you," he said firmly, "and I am going to make sure that your voices are heard, not just today, but every day going forward. We are going to give you the resources you need to not only succeed, but to thrive." The employees left the meeting feeling heard and hopeful, and the CEO watched as they walked out, knowing that the journey wasn't over, but that this was a huge step in the right direction. As the days turned into weeks, the company slowly began to heal. It was far from perfect, but it was better than it had ever been. The Black CEO had made sure that every decision he made, every change he implemented, was rooted in fairness, equality, and respect. The work he had started was not just about building a successful business. It was about building a legacy where every employee felt valued, where everyone had an equal shot at success, no matter their background. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was worth it. One evening, as the CEO sat at his desk, looking out over the city skyline, he reflected on everything that had happened. He had faced resistance, criticism, and setbacks, but he had never wavered. He had stayed true to his mission. The company was stronger than it had been before, not because of profits or accolades, but because it had finally created a culture of inclusion, respect, and true equality. He had made the change he had promised to make, and it had ripple effects that would be felt for years to come. As he turned off his desk lamp and stood to leave for the night, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The work would continue, and he would continue to lead with the same commitment, the same drive, the same unwavering belief that fairness and justice would always prevail.